Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of the Hanford Nuclear Lecture Series. My name is Robert Franklin. I'm an assistant professor of history here on the WSU Tri-Cities campus, as well as the assistant director of the Hanford History Project and the curriculum co-lead, along with Katie Banks, for this Hanford Nuclear Lecture Series. I'd like to start off by welcoming all of you here in person and also all of you who will be watching this in the future. Thank you for attending. I would also like to welcome and thank our Japanese partners, Dr. Nakamura and his staff, for working on all the sides of this, including the content on the Japanese side, and also acknowledge that this is funded by a 5-year grant from MEXT, the Japanese Ministry of Education, Science, and Technology, through the Japanese Society for Promotion of Science. Without their funding and work, this would not be possible. So the Hanford Nuclear Lecture Series has 5 goals within it: to coordinate cross-cultural understanding, to understand the historical context of Hanford and Fukushima, to engage interdisciplinary and comparative analysis, to analyze the environmental impacts on our two communities, and to evaluate economic impacts on our two communities. On the Hanford side, we have decided to do this 5-part lecture series that spans the 80 years of history at the Hanford site. You, of course, are at the first one, talking about Fukushima-Hanford collaborations and also Hanford's nuclear legacy. Today, you'll hear from this esteemed panel up front about the roots of this Fukushima-Hanford project, and then we'll hear from Tom Marceau about indigenous histories of the Hanford site, and then from Dr. Bauman and myself about the Manhattan Project. Session 2 on October 10th will be about Hanford's plutonium production and its environmental impacts. That will be held at CBC. Dr. Bauman and I will again present on the Cold War history of the Hanford site, and we'll also hear from Brian Freer and Bruce Napier covering airborne environmental releases in the Hanford Dose Reconstruction Project, respectively. Session 3 will begin to move us away from history and human health and looking at the cleanup mission and its regional impacts. Tricia Pritikin, a noted downwinder advocate, will join us virtually to talk about the downwinders and downwinder litigation, and then in the Hanford cleanup framework. And then Rick Raymond and Alan Rither will join us to talk about a variety of current decommissioning, cleanup, waste remediation, and PNNL's diverse missions here at in the Hanford region. And that is on October 31st, also at CBC. The 4th session, Economic Development and Diversification in the Tri-Cities, will cover that kind of last goal, the evaluating economic impact. That'll be on November 21st, also again at CBC. And we'll look at such things as TRICNIC, the Tri-Cities Nuclear Industrial Council, its diversification into TRIDEC, Tri-Cities Economic Development Council, and other things like the Hanford Reach National Monument, the creation of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park, and just development strategies for the Tri-Cities, economic development strategies. Lastly, the 5th lecture, Energy and Future Tri-Cities Initiatives, will be here at the WSU Tri-Cities, right here in East, and this will be looking at our kind of future impacts and future goals and places we're moving into with the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures, Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Lab, and kind of the energy opportunities and challenges that await this, that we're meeting and going to meet here. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to let this great panel talk about, and moderated by Dr. Bauman, talk about how all this came together. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Triplett. I've worked at PNNL for 40 years, starting in 1983, and last year I retired. So before I get into this, I want to give you a little background about how I became involved in this activity. So during my 40 years at PNNL, most of my work was focused on the Hanford site. I've worked on most aspects of Hanford cleanup. And then in 2013, I got a most unique opportunity to work in Japan. So I worked through the State Department's Embassy Science Fellowship Program, and along with two other colleagues from the United States, we got to work with Japan's Ministry of the Environment. And our focus with them was to help them organize and conduct their off-site remediation program. From the impacts of the Fukushima accident, the cleanup there is really divided into two parts. There's the decommissioning of the nuclear plant itself, and then there's the cleanup of those areas that were contaminated by the accident. Some of that's shown in the diagrams here. When I came back from my assignment in Japan, I suddenly found myself becoming sort of a nuclear tour guide or tour agent. And we hosted many different delegations from Japan. Most of those initially were interested in Hanford cleanup approaches and PNNL technology development. But there was a sudden shift in that because after we hosted a few of those, a number of people came over. They weren't that interested in the technology. They were more interested in the community and how could this Tri-Cities community be so vibrant, be so successful and growing with this large nuclear legacy that it was sitting next to. So that really became the question that we wrestled with, is how is our 80-year history with the Hanford site and the development of the Tri-Cities, how is our experience relevant to the recovery of the communities around Fukushima? So I'll talk a little bit about the collaborations we've had to date, give you a little background on the Hanford Tri-Cities experience relative to the Fukushima experience, and I'll talk a little bit about key similarities and differences in the sites, and also provide a few insights that we've been able to come up with based on the numerous visits we've had with Japanese organizations who've come here. So first, I want to acknowledge a colleague of mine, Dr. Yasuo Nishi. He passed away, unfortunately, last summer, but it was really a lot of his work that set this collaboration in motion. So he and I worked together at PNNL for a very long time. He retired from PNNL also after about 40 years. And after the Fukushima accident occurred, he started working with Japanese institutions, and he and I collaborated on quite a few visits. And it was really, I think, his insight that started to guide some of the visitors we had to organizations like TRIDEC and the ports, the educational institutions, WSU Tri-Cities and CBC, in addition to looking at PNNL's broader mission and role here. One of the key events that happened was in January 2014, one of the Japanese Diet members, basically a congressman, Mr. Akaba, came to the Tri-Cities. He was at the time heading up Japan's Office of Recovery for some of the local communities. He was very much enamored with the TRIDEC model of economic development. And when he went back to his job in Japan, he set up the Fukushima Innovation Coast Framework, which remains one of the key engines for recovery and economic development in Fukushima today. If Dr. Onishi was here, he would say that the Innovation Coast Framework was more of a federal top-down organization, while TRIDEC and some of the organizations here really work from the bottom up to figure out what are the community's priorities and to advocate for those. So, and I think that theme has been recognized by our partners here, Higashi Nippon International University and the National Institute of Technology. They're really looking at creating something that's more community-driven in terms of guiding the economic recovery for the communities that have been affected by this. So first, a few of the recent collaborations we've had. Dr. Onishi and I gave a series of seminars in Fukushima in late 2019. And then several of us attended a symposium in Fukushima, including Kate and Michael. and a couple other folks from the Tri-Cities, as well as people joined us remotely from the communities. And there we got to interact with our counterparts, the business, community, academic leaders in Fukushima, to exchange ideas. And that then led to a virtual or remote workshop the following year. Subsequently, we've had a number of cooperative agreements set up between Higashi Nippon International University and CBC, WSU. We also have a cooperative agreement between TRIDEC and a counterpart organization in Japan known as the Fukushima-Hamadori TRIDEC. Hamadori just refers to the coastal region of Fukushima Prefecture, where most of the impacts happened. And then I think probably one of the most exciting parts of the collaboration that we have in place that's supported by Japan is we started having student exchanges. In 2023, we had 3 Japanese students come to CBC and WSU, and then we had 10 more this past March. And just recently, we sent 5 students from WSU, CBC, along with 2 staff to Japan, where they got to visit Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and spend a couple weeks in Fukushima, really living with the families, understanding the culture and the situation there. So I think that those kinds of visits we do plan to continue with the support of the 5-year grant that is supporting the activity with Higashi Nippon International University. So we're really looking forward to sending a lot more students there. I know that it was very impactful for all of them, and it was really excellent experience. So as Robert mentioned, we're going to be talking about the 80-year history of the Hanford site and its relationship with the Tri-Cities economy. And I'm not going to go into any detail on this, but it really began with the Manhattan Project in 1943. And you can really look at 2 phases of the Hanford mission: the plutonium production mission, which started with the Manhattan Project and ended approximately in 1988. And then the cleanup mission started with the signing of the Tri-Party Agreement in 1989. And that is ongoing, and we'll also hear about those aspects as well. So this is a slide I've used in Japan quite often that really illustrates some of the attraction that the Japanese see for why is the Tri-Cities so important. And it's really this fairly steady growth that we've seen in both the population and in the overall vitality of the region. And so this shows, since roughly the mid-90s, this is one of the fastest growing places in the United States, and continues to be very vibrant and exciting. That growth, though, was not necessarily completely linear. And I think, as we'll hear in the 4th set of lectures on economic development, there are a number of events that really caused the community to have to look back at itself and figure out, what is our identity, where are we going as a region. And Robert mentioned the Tri-Cities Nuclear Industrial Council was founded in the mid-60s, but then there was a major disruptive event, I think in the mid-80s, which is when I first came here. There was a Chernobyl accident in Ukraine, which was a reactor somewhat similar to the N reactor that we had here. The Washington Public Power Supply System was in the process of building 3 commercial reactors on the site, but there was a debt default, so only one of those 3 was completed. And the end of the plutonium production mission was in sight. So there was a lot of uncertainty about the future of the Tri-Cities, the jobs, the housing market, and so on. The other event in the mid-80s about that same time was the release of 19,000 pages of previously secret documents about the impact that the Hanford operations had in the early days on the region in terms of the releases of radioactive contaminants. And that really caused a lot of distrust and anger among the population in terms of what was being hidden at the Hanford site. So again, I think the 4th set of lectures is really going to focus on this economic development history. And then the final 3 lectures focus on the future in terms of our transition from cleanup to clean energy and really designing our future as we go from here. So I have a few slides on the Fukushima situation itself. So March 2011, mid-afternoon, there was a magnitude 9 earthquake off the northeast coast of Japan. There followed a massive tsunami, which inundated the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station. It was about 45 to 50 feet high, and it immediately caused a full station blackout so that the operators had no idea what the condition was within the reactors themselves. That without the active cooling water, even though the nuclear reactors had been shut down when the earthquake hit, the residual heat boiled off a lot of the water, it created hydrogen, and then there were hydrogen explosions in 3 of the reactor buildings, and that allowed the radioactive contaminants to be released over the next several days to weeks. And you can see from the diagram here that there was a lot of movement of the radioactive plumes off to the northwest. In total, about 160,000 people had to be evacuated from these communities, and that took place over the few days after the accident. So in terms of the reactor cores themselves, they are still hot enough to require cooling water. So it's an active situation, but it's reasonably stable compared to what it was in those early days. These 2 charts show the change in surface dose rates in the affected areas. The reduction, this is from 2011 to 2018, and there's continues to be reduction in the radiation levels. And it's really due to a combination of cleanup activities that Japan undertook and the decay of the radionuclides and also the weathering or the natural attenuation of the contamination that was there. This chart shows the impacts to the 11 communities that had to be evacuated. The green crosshatched areas are the areas that have been cleaned up sufficient for people to return. Unfortunately, only about 20 to 40% of the original population has been able to return to those areas. They've chosen to live elsewhere in Japan. The gray areas are areas that really are still too contaminated to support permanent residence or occupancy. Within those areas, the blue areas have been selected for continuation of some of the original businesses and industries in those areas to give them some opportunity to revitalize the region. But this really shows the difficulty that the Japanese are faced with in terms of revitalizing the Fukushima region. Okay. So one of the things I want to do is talk about some of the similarities and differences between the Hanford situation and Fukushima. Obviously, one of the key items is that they're both very technically complex, very long remediation and decommissioning activities. It's a multi-decade mission in both cases. They both require innovative science and technology to find solutions to the problems. There's a fair amount of public distrust of the government and the cleanup institutions. And there's a requirement, a need to continually train the new workforce to support the long-term cleanup missions. Some key differences, though, in Fukushima, there were contamination areas in residential agricultural areas, and those required surface remediation. Hanford did not face anything like that. Also, as I mentioned, residential areas needed to be evacuated due to the accident. And even now, 13 years after the accident, most people have not been able to return. The fourth item on here, I think, is perhaps one of the most important differences I see in that in Japan, most of the decommissioning and science and technology workers at the Daiichi site are not permanent residents. And while if you look in contrast, at the Hanford site, we've got about 12,000 contractors working there, and including DOE staff, there's another 6,000 or so employees at PNNL. All of those people live in this community. Their families are here, their homes are here, and that really gives them an incentive to invest in those communities. In Fukushima, unfortunately, most of the workers are really on temporary assignments, so they're not well integrated in the communities. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that they face right now, is how do you get more benefit from the money that's being spent to clean up the nuclear site. And then the last item is there's significant reputation damage to some traditional businesses, particularly agricultural products in Fukushima and the fisheries. Whether or not there's actual damage to those crops and industries is sort of beside the point, but the reputation damage is really hampering their recovery. So finally, Dr. Onishi and I, in some of our seminars with the people who've visited and going over to Japan, came up with these 5 strategies or lessons learned that you could take from our experience at Hanford and the Tri-Cities. And the first one is really inspired by TRIDEC and its economic development mission, that they are very effective at speaking as one voice for the community. Even though we have multiple cities, multiple interests in the community, they're able to bring together those differing perspectives to come up with effective advocacy for the region. So it's a balance between competition between the communities versus cooperation. And that's something I've heard over and over from the visitors that we have here, is that emphasis on cooperation is very, very important and something that they're missing, I think, in Fukushima. The second item is really ties back to Pacific Northwest National Lab and its role in the community. And if you look back in 1965, when it was first initiated, 100% of the business was Hanford oriented. It consolidated the Hanford laboratories and R&D activities. Today, I think less than 5% of P&L's business is really Hanford oriented. It has very diverse missions. And I think, and it's also important for supporting the growth of other high-tech businesses and industries in the area. This is one where the Japanese have set up a new institute, the Fukushima Institute for Research, Education, and Innovation, FRE. And it has been put together in one of the Fukushima communities. Their leaders visited here last year to come to PNNL and the Tri-Cities to see, as really to learn from a potential role model, if you will, for what they want their institute to do. In about 2 weeks, PNNL's lab director, Steve Ashby, will be going to Japan to sign a cooperative agreement with the FRE Institute. So I think that's one where they really recognize an example of Tri-Cities success, and they're trying to emulate that. Number 3 is one that was extremely important at the start of the cleanup mission, where DOE incentivized the contractors at Hanford to invest in the local communities. They've invested in the universities here and in many other aspects of the Tri-Cities. And so that's again another aspect that I think they need to take advantage of. Mike Lawrence had talked to some of the visitors who came here, and his point was that if Tokyo Electric Power Company or others really want to convince the Fukushima communities that they're serious and safe about their cleanup, that those leaders, those executives would move to Fukushima, they'd live there with their families. And I think that's a very powerful statement, that we do have that in the Tri-Cities with the folks managing the cleanup work. Fourth is really building that long-term workforce. And our partners at HNIU and National Institute of Technology really recognize this. They recognize it's not just creating the R&D skills, science and technology skills, but it's a broad range of capabilities that are needed to support the long-term mission. And so that's one that they're definitely working on. The fifth really gets back to the fundamental infrastructure needed by those regions. And I think we both, Fukushima and us, are very much focused on future energy supply, which is, again, one of the sets of lectures that we will have. So finally, I just wanted to thank all of you for being here, and I hope you'll join us for the remainder of the lectures that we have coming up. I'm really excited about the caliber of the speakers we have, and particularly interested in hearing the very diverse perspectives that those speakers bring to this situation. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Appreciate that. My name is Bob Bauman. I'm a history professor here and also the Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education here at WSU Tri-Cities. So I'm going to just very briefly introduce our panelists, and then they are going to have about 3 to 5 minutes to each talk about their experiences with HNIU, how they feel about the partnership, how it benefits their institution, and what impacts they've seen so far in their institution. So just very briefly, Mr. Triplett, Mark Triplett, who already spoke, is the curriculum co-lead and project advisor for the Hanford Nuclear Legacy Lecture Series and guest faculty at Higashi Nippon International University. Dr. Kate McAteer, to his left, is the Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs here at WSU Tri-Cities. Dr. Rebekah Woods is the President of Columbia Basin College, and Dr. Michael Lee is the Vice President for Instruction at Columbia Basin College. So thank you all for coming today, being part of the panel. You can each have about 3 to 5 minutes to talk on the sort of guiding questions, what your experience has been with HNIU, if you've gone to Japan, what your experience there has been like, how this partnership has benefited your institution to this point. And so I'll start, Dr. McAteer, is that okay? Start with you.
Sure, thank you, Bob. Yeah, I went to Japan in January 2020 to attend the symposium that Mark talked about. And it was a great experience for me personally and as an educator. I think one of the most surprising things for me was to see that people had not returned to live in that area. It was very striking because that's not something that we experience here. As we toured the power plant, and we were able to see where the tsunami hit. Everything in that area just kept coming back to me about how different Hanford and Fukushima are, but also then to think about, well, how can we as educators help really revitalize that area. And in terms of the impact here now on the campus, we did have 2 students go this summer, Michael and Brianna, and one of our faculty, Sarah. And so what's amazing was to talk to those students about their experiences in Japan, but I think what I could see was how excited they are to try to convince the other students here on campus to go to Japan and experience what they experienced. So that's something that we all want as educators to make sure our students are becoming global citizens. And so I think this partnership is really helping us expand those opportunities for our students. And then just in terms of our faculty member, Dr. Sarah Newcomer, that went to Japan with the students this summer. Sarah has been to Japan before, but what she said, the trip this summer and the partnership with CBC and HNIU and Fukushima College in the last year has really reinforced for her the importance of international friendships for students, empathy in multilingual situations, especially in classrooms for her pre-teachers. So I think even for the faculty that already have international experiences, there's a lot that they're learning from this collaboration that we now have.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Woods.
Thank you. So I'm the one panelist that has not traveled to Japan, so I was not able to join them.
But we've hosted several delegations on our campus, including Dr. Nakamura and several of his colleagues, as well as the students. So I've certainly had the opportunity to learn a lot from him and from those visits. As Kate said, I think it's so important for our students as the world gets smaller to make sure that they are having that exposure to just different globalization efforts. And many of our students will not ever travel outside of the US. One of our students that went last summer, if I'm remembering correctly, I think she said she had never even been outside of Washington. So the opportunity to even have, certainly them going, but to have these students coming to our campus, for them to be able to get exposure to a different country, to a different culture, to different experiences, I think is really going to benefit them greatly. We are a Hispanic serving institution and have been very intentionally leaning into that identity and trying to ensure that we're learning more about the Hispanic culture and how we can serve those students. But it's also at the same time, I would say, kind of sparking our interest to make sure that we are learning about all the different cultures that exist on our campus. And perhaps somewhat ironically, we have a faculty member, Noriko Ryder, who has for years taught Japanese language classes on our campus, as well as advises our Japanese student culture club that is extremely active and very engaged in learning more about Japan. So when we had the students on campus, they were the leaders in really kind of hosting the students and making sure that they had a great experience here in the Tri-Cities. And then we had the students that went, we had the 3 students that went last summer, and then we have 4 that'll be going this next summer. We had them present to campus about their experiences. And one of the things I asked them was, why each of them, because I think I was a little surprised at how excited they were just about the opportunity to go, though I probably shouldn't, considering what was being gifted to them, really. Why, what it was that sparked their interest. And while it was all something very different, the experience for them there was just, really just transformational. We have a student from the club that did not go that is now going over there this fall that's going to be studying at HNIU. We have another student that is also talking about going and being there longer term. So I think the way it has impacted them personally, just their now exposure to this different culture in a different country and what it has exposed them to outside of what they've been able to just experience here in the Tri-Cities has really been profound for them. So I think it's been an amazing opportunity for our college and for all of our students, and really has brought a lot of excitement to the campus. The one event that we did, we co-hosted and did a lot of events collaboratively when their students were here last spring. But the one event, we called it a multicultural campus celebration, I think it was, between the Japanese, our student club, as well as LULAC, one of our Latino student clubs on campus, and then all the students from WSU, as well as from CBC in the Japan, HNIU and Fukushima. We had over 300 people there from our campuses as well as from the community. And it was just wildly successful. And again, just such a great experience for them to be able to, experience the food, the language, the history, learning some of the dances. It was just a wonderful time for our entire campus, and I think has really spurred a lot of interest in learning more. So we're looking forward to the remainder of our partnership and what it's going to mean for our campus, but for our community as well.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Lee.
So I'll focus on the trip in January of 2020 and some of the takeaways. And I had done international travel, much more on as a tourist. And so going there for work with folks, I think we demonstrated in our symposium presentations the cooperative nature of this community. WSU, CBC, we had a faculty member who teaches in our nuclear technology program go to talk about his work at both Energy Northwest and at CBC and how cooperative that program, the creation of that program was. We had someone from TriDec and of course our ringleader Mark down at the end. So we really demonstrated at that symposium how we were cooperative and how we partnered with each other. I think the other thing, the trip to the Fukushima plant, again, the driving through the community from Iwaki City, where Higashi Nippon University is, to the plant was for me shocking. I did not know what to expect. I don't think there's a lot of tourist guides around what you expect to see. And the one thing, we started at a museum, and the presentation, the film presentation, started with a deep apology from the company that owned the nuclear power plant. And I was struck by that. I think Kate and I talked about it as we walked out. It's like, that is such a different cultural experience from often what happens in American companies. And I think one of the things that with Hanford, the secrecy of it, and there's no judgment on either way, but I think it's just looking at how different our cultures are, but how similar we can also be. And that was what struck me. It was also striking to put on a dosimeter and get in a bus that had the dosimeter reading as we went to the plant. Again, not my usual day over at CBC. And that was again, understanding the difference between our experience here in the Tri-Cities and the experience that they had in the Fukushima region. Really struck me. I think the other element was the level of formality and informality in our cultures. In the West particularly, we are a fairly informal culture, and certainly Japanese culture has that level of formality. And so I think there was that, for me as an observer, it's like, when are we formal? When are they informal? And just trying to understand and negotiate that, which I think is growth. That is how we understand each other and why we do what we do. Not judging, not that one is better, one is worse, but that we're different and maybe where that comes from. So that was an important part of my experience there. In terms of campus, I think, as Dr. Wood said, it has really inspired our Japanese Culture Club and other students on our campus. I think the faculty are very interested in hearing more about this project as it grows, and that's very exciting. And certainly the students who got to go had a great time. And I think more students are probably thinking about taking their Japanese language classes so that they might be prepared if they get picked to do that.
Great, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts and comments. So you all mentioned just sort of this cross-cultural understanding, and especially for students who were able to go to Japan, and Dr. McAteer, Dr. Lee talked about going to Japan yourselves and that experience. So this is the first hour of 14 hours of sessions coming. For those students here or those students in Japan who will be watching these sessions and aren't going to have the opportunity necessarily to travel, what do you hope that they come away from these sessions? What do you hope they learn, or some takeaways that you hope they leave the series with? And I'll open up to whoever wants to take that on.
I think one of the things that I think about particularly on the Hanford history, is for our students to have a better understanding of their own history that they may not be aware of, and a better understanding of Japanese culture and the Fukushima incident, and then vice versa. But I think starting with our own students and their maybe limited knowledge of Hanford, I think that's exciting to get that out in front.
As someone who teaches that regularly, and my colleague Robert Franklin will back me up on this, right? Our students really don't know a lot of that history generally coming in. Maybe one of their parents has worked at Hanford or not, but the actual history of the site, the knowledge is fairly limited. So yeah, I totally agree with your statement there, yes.
Yeah, I'll certainly agree with that. My husband and I have lived here 7 years and was surprised at moving here at just trying to learn more about the area and interacting with others, some folks that had never been to Hanford and really didn't know much about what happens out there. That was a little surprising, considering the incredible impact that we know that this has in our community. But I would absolutely also hope that our students and others, not just learning the history of what has happened here in our own community, but I loved the similarities and the differences that Mark was pointing out. And I think it's important for our students. I think it will kind of humanize other countries and other cultures for them, for us to see that even though, again, huge, big world, and we tend to focus on the differences about how different things are outside of the US and between different countries and different cultures. But I think them seeing the similarities, the similar experiences that we're all going through, I think that's going to be a huge learning for them, and I hope really help, again, us just focus on the commonalities that exist between all human beings.
So I'll talk about what I would like for the Japanese students that will be watching this series, and for many of them that may not get an opportunity to visit the Tri-Cities, but that like Mark mentioned, there's many, many years ahead for decontaminating and cleaning up, and it's going to require science and innovation. And it's those students that are going to be key to having those innovative ideas, to being understanding the science and realizing that it is safe to move back into those areas that have been cleaned up. So that's what I really hope for the students. And then, for students on our here in the Tri-Cities, well, obviously we talked about understanding their history, but also seeing how they can help with the work and the studies that they undertake here at CBC and WSU, and the innovations that they can come up with aren't just important for expanding business and operations around cleanup and clean energy in the Tri-Cities, but also that those ideas will be they'll be able to be translated and adapted in Japan, and to really help revitalize Fukushima.
So one of the things I would like to see is a more complete story of the connection between Hanford's original history and Nagasaki, for example. I'm very jealous that our students got to go there and really completing that story. When you go to B Reactor, it's sort of just this one side. When you go to the Reach Museum, it's just this one side. It would be great if we could get the students really to tell both sides of that story, because I know it's a very moving experience for everyone.
Right. One more question, then I'll open it up to the audience for any questions. How do you see this partnership evolving in the future, looking forward? You talked a little bit about this, Mark, but I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I can go first. So I talked about students and their ideas, and one of the things that we do at WSU, especially with our engineering students, is they have capstone projects where they are sponsored by some of the industry partners that are involved in the cleanup on the Hanford site. And those students are really working for an entire year on a problem that they've been given to address the cleanup. And I've often thought about, as this partnership grows, how maybe we bring in another aspect to that, where maybe it's students in Japan are also part of the project. So you're bringing in a global perspective to those projects. And so that's, I think, I also think about, we love that our students are getting these opportunities, but then what are some of the opportunities that we can give for our faculty and staff to also experience these exchanges?
Great, yeah.
I absolutely could see it continuing to just spur the desire to, bring more international aspects to our campus and integrate some of those perspectives into our events, into our curriculum, into the work that we do, and try to provide more experiences for our students. We're in the process. We have some pretty defined ideas over the next few years, but it will be exciting to see what some ideas are for after that time.
And I think for our students who are largely first gen, the idea of international travel, international exchange, not necessarily just to Japan, but growing a program where students have opportunities to go and study abroad. I think that's an exciting thing that I don't know if a lot of community colleges have capacity to grow that. I'm not sure where that will be in 5 years. I'm also excited to think about the lecture series growing. If 15 hours the first year, how can we tell a very detailed, nuanced story in this project? And I'm looking forward to seeing how that will unfold in the coming years.
Great.
Yeah, I think following on with that, we had to be very selective in the 15 lectures. And as I mentioned, what I think is really amazing is all of the different perspectives that our speakers bring to this, because we all have a different perspective on this history that we've been a part of. And I think in the future, there's probably many other perspectives that we could bring into this that would be very exciting to hear from.
Great. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to the audience now. Any questions you might have for the panel? Yeah.
So several people have mentioned the repopulation of the area. I've been there, and it's stark. The barriers, the why, initially you have an evacuation, you understand. But it's been a long time since the evacuation. So I'm interested in the panel's judgment spots on why there have not been the repopulation. In particular, there's a lot of people that commute to that facility every day from long distances. And that's clearly an institutional decision somewhere along the way, but there's got to be more to it.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I mentioned was that, as you mentioned, the workers there are really remote workers. They're temporary employees. And I think I've talked to the Japanese a lot about that, and that would go a long way towards getting that base population back there. I think the other reason that people haven't returned is they've had 13 years to develop their homes and their lives elsewhere. So I think that's where they're looking at some new businesses and opportunities. And in the companion lecture series, they do talk about the investments they're making in these smaller companies. And I think in the mid-'80s, we had a similar kind of problem, which we'll hear about later, is that how do we replace the jobs that are going away? And we had a lot of failures and a number of successes. And I think that's the period that they're going through right now. They're trying to figure out what works, what can bring people into the region.
I think I would add to what Mark is saying. There's going to be a fear. People that don't truly understand how radiation works and what happens to all of that decontaminated soil, right? So when you have people that are afraid, they're not going to come back if they see the people that are actually working and leading these efforts. If they're not living there, it just perpetuates that fear. So.
What is the long-term plan for the Fukushima plant?
That's a good question. So it's they have a roadmap for the decommissioning of the plant. The 3 of the reactors had core melts, and those 3 reactors are right at sea level, basically. And that's, to me, one of the most difficult challenges is how do you get in and pull that melted fuel out? We've never done that anywhere. 3 Mile Island didn't have to do that. Chernobyl built a big shelter over it. They didn't have to move it. The Japanese plan, they're doing lots of investigations and technology development to figure out how can they get that fuel out. And it's going to take a very long time. It's a huge problem. And going to be very challenging. But that's the biggest step that they have to go through, is really how do you remove that source that's right next to the ocean.
So what is Japan's strategy for nuclear energy?
I'm not really the best to talk to that. I think they've restarted a number of plants, but quite a few of them aren't. And I think, like we're doing here, they're looking at some clean energy options. I know Fukushima is very much focused on non-nuclear energy supply. So at least in certain parts of the country, they're not looking to nuclear as a solution, even though it was a major part of their generating capacity prior to the accident.
Other questions, anyone? Yeah, Bob, sure.
So if they shut down like the nuclear plants, then how did they generate energy? Like, I mean, was that right away that they shut down the other plants, or?
Yes. Yes, they did. I think most of the plants were shut down to reevaluate the safety environment. And I was in Japan quite often after that, and they took some heroic measures to reduce their energy consumption, so much so that buildings in Tokyo would be 85 degrees in the summer. It was not fun. But they've looked at liquefied natural gas, and in Fukushima, they've built lots and lots of solar panels, but it's a challenge. It's a big issue in Japan right now, is how do they replace that?
How large is the remediation area? Like square miles?
So the area that was evacuated on, if you remember the first chart I showed up, is almost exactly the same as the area of the Hanford site. Hanford site's roughly 500 square miles, 1,500 square kilometers. It's been shrunk down so that it's not that large anymore. So it's maybe a third of that, I think, at the present time. But again, the gray area that I showed on one of those charts is pretty significant. Most of those communities are fairly small, they're very rural. It's a lot of forest land, agricultural land. So those are going to be difficult to recover. There was broader remediation even outside Fukushima Prefecture that took place, but the levels didn't require evacuation or anything of that sort.
How is the experience of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and coming out of that similar or different from Fukushima?
Sure.
Stumped us.
It's a difficult question. I'm not really sure. I mean, those events were quite different and took place, 78 years ago or 79 years ago or something on that order. So while Fukushima is more continuing something we continue to see today in terms of the work that's being done. So I think that's still, when I brought up, that's one of the things I'd like to see is more of a connection between our history and the history at Nagasaki, for example.
One more question, yeah.
Have we implemented any clean cleanup techniques from Fukushima?
Well, interesting you should say that. In 2018, I took the head of the tank farm contractors technology division to Fukushima to look at the water treatment technology they were using, an ion exchange method. And that is the method that's being used now at the Hanford site to treat tank waste. It was actually developed here, but it was applied on a large scale at Fukushima. And so it was that experience of the large scale application of the separation technology for the cesium primarily that people here were interested in so that it could be applied to getting treatment of the tank waste going. So yeah, generally the Japanese were coming here looking for technology and solutions, but that is a case where we went over there to see how they were applying that technology to a problem that we have here as well.
Great question. All right, we're just about out of time. I'm going to ask the panel one more question. And that is, I asked you about students and what you hope they take away. Is there a session coming forward or a lecture that you in particular are really looking forward to? Mark, you've talked about there's lots of really interesting and exciting things to have. Are there one or two in particular that you're like, I really have to see that?
Well, one of the ones I'm really looking forward to is Mike Schwenk talking. He has 2 lectures actually on the economic development from the earliest stages up to probably the 2010 or so. And he was in that hot seat in the mid 80s when everything was sort of falling apart. And so I really want to hear his perspective on how the community came together, what kinds of things they did to try to respond to the crises at the time. Because I remember I was in the market to buy my first house at the time, and you wonder, oh my God, is that a good thing to do or not? But he was here and working in those organizations, so that's a part of the story I haven't really heard before, and I'm really interested in hearing about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an unfair question because they all look amazing. Being from outside the Tri-Cities, I always love continuing to learn more about the community and our history. So I'm really looking forward to those. I mean, Mark has totally sold me now on session 4, but also being in the position that we are, CBC wanting to serve the needs of our community. I'm also always interested in what's the future and how can we be part of making sure that that workforce is ready. So I'm very much looking forward to session 4.
And I think coming from a humanities background as an English teacher, I'm always drawn to history and culture. And so some of the more scientific stuff is probably more challenging, and maybe that's where I want to spend my energy, is understanding more of the science behind this.
I mean, they all look fascinating and so interesting, but I think similar to Dr. Woods, I'm interested in the last one around clean energy, because I'm really interested in hearing the speakers' perspectives and how nuclear energy is going to play a role in that future.
Great. Thank you very much. So thank you to the panel, Cheval, for your time. And thank you, audience, for your terrific questions. Thank you for your attendance and your listening to the panelists and your questions. So we'll be taking about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we'll be starting our second session with our friend and colleague Tom Marceau talking about some history of the Hanford site. So thank you very much.